Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's having a great day and appreciate you all taking the time to join today's discussion on the board's role in reskilling for the AI era. Tara Tate's here. I'm a partner with Pay Governance, a firm focused on executive and non-employee board of director compensation advisory services. And since about January 2023, I've had the pleasure to partner with Lisa and Kate and the rest of the NACD crew to form a community of Latino board members where we get together and talk about various experiences and connect on a personal basis. There's so much for us to cover today, and I welcome all questions. So please include any questions in the chat, and we will do our best to address them as they come in. We are very fortunate to have 4 panelists who have a lot of wonderful perspectives on reskilling for the AI era. So let me turn it over to Sandra to kick off panel introductions.
Buenos días, buenas tardes, everyone. Glad to be here. My name is Sandra Lopez. My pedigree has been predominantly in the marketing GM roles for the tech industry, both small, mid, and large. In addition to that, I serve on boards, 2 nonprofits, one anchored in Sports Integrity Global Alliance, the irony of what has happened just recently around sports betting, and the other one is a national board member for the Junior Achievement, driving financial literacy for all, and then a PE-backed board as well, so driving digital automation for creative assets. So glad to be here and share what I'm learning around the AI journey of various corporations.
Leah, you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. Leah Solivan here. I'm the founder of TaskRabbit. Ran the company as CEO for about a decade. Was chair of the board as well. After that, before we sold the company to IKEA, the global furniture retailer, I now sit on the board of a public company called PetMeds, which does pet care and pet pharmacy. I also run a venture capital fund and work with early stage teams across technology sectors to help them build and scale their companies.
Chief, over to you, and then Robert, please.
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name is Shiv Singh. I built my career in the corporate world at Visa, PepsiCo, and LendingTree. My own business advisory firm. I'm an author of 3 books, including one on AI. And I sit on the board of United Rentals, which is a $15 billion annual revenue, 30,000 employee company. And I've been on the board for 8 years now.
Hello, I'm Robert Tate. I'm a partner at PwC in our workforce solutions practice. Been focused on helping large organizations align their business goals and their organizational capabilities to jobs and skills necessary to really achieve successful outcomes, and been doing that for about 20 years. And as you can imagine, with the focus on the emerging trends on AI, I've really helped organization think about and focus on helping plan for the future of work in the age of AI, and I'm really delighted to be sharing my experiences today with the panel, and look forward to the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. We are definitely living in interesting and scary times when it comes to the role AI has been playing and will continue to play in the workforce. Many companies have exploring how their company can be more efficient in delivering results when AI is incorporated into its overall strategy. And some experts even have said that AI could eliminate up to 50% of entry-level jobs. However, I think while many jobs may be eliminated, there are also lots of opportunities for new jobs to come into play. So Sandra, from your multiple lens, where are companies in their workforce reskilling journeys?
I think that's a great question, and I would love to have a turnkey answer for those attendees. But reality is every corporation is at a different stage. So if you think about just the overall culture, there are some companies that have to adopt AI skilling at a slower rate just because of regulation. Or manufacturing culturally, the transformation is a lot slower versus there's other companies, technology as an example, that drive AI acceleration at a faster rate. And then in particular, if you are a startup, whether technology, CPG, you can have the mindset of an AI first type of organization and really adopt the new tools and technologies to drive your organization. So when I look at the maturity of all these companies, it really is codependent on your culture. But I'd like to highlight a research that came out of McKinsey this morning, where they reached out to, I think it was about Fortune 1000 corporations. And the question was, how mature is your enterprise around AI? And the response was less than 1% believed that they reached maturity, which means that we're still all testing and learning, and none of us are experts. And I think the best thing to do is, at least in my learning, is create your own board of directors around AI so that we can learn best practices and begin to adopt them, whether you're in a board advising and recommending it to the C-suite, or whether you are a full-time employee of an organization thinking about that transformation.
Yeah, and I would imagine, Sandra, that with the AI, continuously evolving, that journey is going to continue to be refined and updated as necessary as well. So
Right.
definitely exciting times.
It never stops. I mean, what I've seen is as quickly as I learn a new AI tool, there's another one being replaced. So I believe this is going to be continuous. And I am a very big believer that we can be reliant on companies to help us upskill. But I think for us to remain relevant, we have to be curious and upskill ourselves. So look for opportunities in Sandbox to try and learn how to create your own agent. And maybe you can't do it at work because of data security or privacy issues. Then take something in terms of your family and what can you do to make your home life a little bit easier and use those tools to test and learn.
Good advice. So Shiv, given all the conversations you have had around the economics of AI agents and whether they are more cost effective in the long run or whether they'll deliver equal or greater business benefits, at this point in time, what do you see as the biggest risk and how are boards confronting the reality of AI?
Yeah, no, great question, Tara, and thanks for having me on. So look, first and foremost, the risk of job displacement is real and it's already happening. And we see it most with entry-level employees. In fact, among entry-level employees or folks in their 20s, unemployment is already hitting 12, 13%, according to a recent Stanford study. When it comes to looking at it across an enterprise, there's certain functions that are arguably being hit harder than others. And I know that that's an interesting word choice when I say hit. Software development, not surprisingly marketing, not surprisingly sales and customer service. Those are the functions where there's been seen a lot more opportunity to drive greater business efficiency and outcomes by leaning a lot more heavily into AI. That would be my first point. The second thing I would say is, for every company, it's fundamentally a strategic choice. So what often gets forgotten in the mix is AI is not cheap, and AI is a spectrum of technologies. And the most successful companies and the companies I work with and advise and where I'm on the board of, they're choosing the places where they can have AI solve their hardest, most complex problems that require the most data and need access to transforming the workflows as well. So it's company specific. You have to take a strong business orientation to it while bearing in mind that it has huge labor force and human ramifications. So it's a question of leadership as well.
Great, thanks, Shiv. Yeah, and in a study that I read around the tech labor, I have read that about 100,000 employees have actually already been, well, there's been turnover in terms of, and a good portion of those employees has been due to AI. And this is specifically in the tech industry. So, I mean, while we would always think that it's going to happen in the tech industry, this has actually happened much broader across all industries. So appreciate you sharing that. Well, yeah, I'd love to hear from you. And I know that as a founder and investor, what approaches are you seeing being utilized to upskill the various functional teams in the workforce?
Yeah, I mean, first off, I think a couple of great points have already been raised around if you're starting from ground zero, you can really think about building AI native. And I'm seeing a lot of that happening in the startup world, right? I mean, across all industries as well. It really is touching everyone everywhere. And so I think if you have that opportunity, you are at an advantage because you're able to move much faster. You're able to build and scale much faster, much differently, being AI native. Now, on the other hand, I sit on a public board and having scaled TaskRabbit and seen other businesses scale, we see a lot of augmentation happening because these are not AI native tech stacks. You do have to look at, where can we augment and bring in intelligence? How can we give the customer service, the customer operations teams access to new products that are tested, that are tried and true and stable, and help them build efficiencies in their workflows. And so, I think on the spectrum of things from startups all the way to a public company, you see things move much slower in those worlds where the tech stacks have already been established. And it's really then about having the teams, garner opportunities to learn. I think Sandra brings up a good point that these tools are changing all the time as well. And so, as a board, you really have to think about not introducing instability and sort of these, head jerk reactions to new technologies that are available, but really helping the management team think through what is the long-term AI strategy for you to augment what you already have there and not necessarily rip out and replace.
Great, thank you. So Robert, PwC has produced a number of articles and surveys in the AI space, and I noticed that recently the 28th Annual Global CEO Survey was released, and it actually reported that more than half of respondents said that Gen AI has resulted in efficiencies in how employees use their time, while around 1/3 reported increased revenues and profitability. When it comes to the future of work, whereby companies are human-led and maybe AI agent-powered, can you please share the workforce transformations that you've been helping executives and board solve for?
Yeah, and I appreciate you quoting the stats, and I appreciate the panel's use of stats because I think that it does bring some context in this ever changing environment that we're talking about today. And so I wouldn't be a good consultant without my own set of stats, but I'm not going to kill everyone with the statistics. But I think that there's something that's really interesting that's happening today around the investment. You mentioned, Tara, in terms of the return on it, but we're also seeing, and this is a study from MIT not too long ago, around 95% of enterprise AI projects are really not seeing much of a return. And we're about to release our Hope and Fears survey, which is a global analysis that we've been running from some time. Interestingly enough, when we talk about in our Hope and Fears survey, how many individuals, what percentage of the workforce uses Gen AI on a daily basis, last year it was a whopping 12%. And so in pre-release, no, this has not been released, but I know some of the editors here, and so I know that this year's number has increased, but it would probably surprise the audience that this year's release of the number of people, the percentage of the workforce that are using Gen AI on a daily basis went from 12% to 14%. Rather shocking to me, in that we talk about Gen AI, we know that it's being implemented. Many more organizations have deployed Gen AI, and as we get down into sort of like what are we seeing, I think this is a good example of what we're seeing in terms of how we need to think about the problem perhaps a little bit differently. But with that said, the flip side of this coin and how we think about the problem perhaps a little bit differently is that obviously skills and the skills mix are starting to change, and we're talking about upskilling on today's discussion, but on average, the job skill mix has changed 32% in the last 3 years due to AI. So there's obviously the technology is ramping up and moving very, very quickly. Skills in itself are trying to catch up and moving equally as fast. And so what we're starting to see is not only a shift within the tech skills specifically, but that over 50% of all AI related jobs are coming outside of tech. So Leah, you mentioned sort of this need for fluency within the tech stack, and that's creating reduction of force or maybe shifting of where people are working, but we're also seeing it influence other functional areas, which is considerable. And the last kind of tidbit that I would provide, especially from a board perspective, is that AI literate roles earn about 28% higher salaries today. So it's almost an equivalent of an $18,000 premium on the skills that are related. So skills are changing, they're broadening outside of tech, and they're getting paid more. And so as we start to think about that, and the conversations we're having with boards and leadership, is that this really isn't about solving a technology adoption issue. It's more about how do we start to create organizational adaptability, resilience. You hear all these buzzwords about it, but it's really how do we start to step into this much more aggressively than we are today. And so you might see these sort of catchphrases of the Gen AI divide or the disconnect between the tech versus the people, but we're definitely seeing a divide between actually application and use cases in the work environment at a broader scale. We're going, as everyone would decide, sort of agree that we're moving from sort of experimentation to integration, and then ultimately, in order to sustain a lot of the impact that we want out of AI, we have to go into transformation. And so we see a lot of leading organizations think about talent as strategic capital, not just as a cost center, or oftentimes we've talked early on around AI about reducing cost. And that's certainly part of it. Like, let's not dance around that topic, but we're seeing more and more organizations think about how do we amplify what's left, or how do we amplify the capabilities we need to. And Shiv, you mentioned outcomes. How do we start to drive the outcomes that our strategic capabilities need to be delivering through AI and through the human component of the workforce? And so I can sort of share a little bit of an example of how PwC has thought about scaling the right capabilities in the sense of we've really redefined our strategic workforce plan in terms of, I mean, our ability to interact with clients as humans is essential. We're not necessarily getting rid of that quite yet. But the human element supported by and augmented by AI is really essential for us as we start to think about how we deliver. And to kind of take it a click down, the way we think about it from a workforce strategy standpoint is that we're really even thinking about how do we recruit differently? How do we get into upstream or sort of entry level? Shiv, I think you mentioned the entry level disruption. Well, we're seeing it as an opportunity. If we can sort of really better define what skills and resource and capabilities we want to have in the future, we got to move way upstream to start hiring and recruiting for them. And so our whole recruiting process and how we think about enabling a new experience for the hires that we are now going to be bringing in that have different skills that are not our traditional skills. We have to reimagine our whole experience around bringing people on board, recruiting, differentiating ourselves on those capabilities. And so that's my last point I want to make, is that as we work with clients to think about this, it is a real fundamental way to shift the mindset around this not being just a tech issue. It's a transformation issue, and that it has to take shape in many different ways as you start to think down the implementation of these things.
Great, that was a lot. Thank you. That's such great information. We did get a couple of questions that came into the chat, so if it's okay, I'm going to go ahead and ask some of them. One was, with the impact of junior employees, what happens with succession planning with the aging IT workforce?
I can take it from like what people have said, given my board work and companies that I am in service to, is the companies will do their best to provide AI upskilling, and yet the training is trying to keep up to how fast this is moving. We've never seen this before. We went back to the history of when we had enterprise software, whether it was Salesforce and Oracle, and that generated a lot of incremental change. And so AI is driving massive transformation. And so in the upskilling of our talent, people are also telling the talent, like, you need to get curious. And so I saw, like, in the group chat, a couple of certification. It is up to you to go get certified and learn and understand your workflow process and proactively provide recommendations where AI is going to drive efficiencies. And so they're looking for, whether you are a manager or an independent contributor or a VP, saying, here's my AI plan, here's how I'm trying to save money, here is where I'm going to generate revenue. I met with my legal team. I looked at risk areas because governance is very important. We've seen hallucinations. We've seen agents access confidential information that now it's putting it out there to the large language models, and being very thoughtful. So really thinking about employees thinking about their own survival and how do you stay relevant. And you're going to have to not be codependent on organizations for the annual training program because they're going to be obsolete. So and thus gives rise to what I call the compassionate leader. So a leader that is both empathetic and understands what their employees are going through, and also being open and honest that we're asking our employees, yes, we'll give them training, yes, we will approve certification, and also for each employee to be curious enough to understand AI so that they can be part of the workforce of tomorrow.
One thing, if I can just add to what Sandra said, is another dimension to this question of what happens to succession planning, is there's a big unknown. And the best example comes from the legal profession, where you have some incredible AI technologies and tools that take away the need for a paralegal, for example. And that used to be the career path in many law firms, or one of the key career paths. And if you don't have that entry-level employee learning how to do the work, because that's what's being AI driven, it breaks the system and sort of the farm system of how people's careers are developed and matured. That doesn't have an easy answer to it. And I think we're seeing that across industry happening. And tied to that, what is also happening as well is considered atrophying of skills, where because we're starting to depend on AI for certain activities, we're losing the ability to do that type of work ourselves, which has longer term ramifications too. So all of this is to say is that question you asked is actually a very complex and a very difficult one.
I would add that it does start to emphasize really the need for the workforce strategy, people strategies to connect with the current AI strategies. And if we think about displacement or disruption to jobs, like really what does that mean, and how do we want to reward and incentivize or progress people with the adoption of new skills? And I love Sandra pointed out that there are human skills and leader-led skills that are required to help transform organizations and create adoption. So we're seeing the new leader skills around AI fluency, coaching and collaboration, psychological safety, creating a more responsible AI-minded organization, things that need some teeth to them, but also need some structure in terms of how do we want to bring our teams along, and how does that start to sort of cascade into roles that we want to grow and develop into future leaders within the business as well.
Another question that came in is, what is the perspective about how organizations can adapt with speed, knowing that they can't wait for years or decades to enable it? Who would like to take that one?
I can tee it up perhaps around adaptability and speed. I think, as I said before, the speed to which organizations are implementing the technology that's going at pace. I think that at pace, and how do you match the speed to which our workforces are going to be aligned to that pace. And so adaptability really does start to break down to its component parts about how do we want to think about roles? Are roles being augmented, or are they going to be automated completely? And what does that impact mean to our people strategies and how we start to deploy that. I think those stats I mentioned previously around the lack of adoption or the lack of ROI is because those two things aren't in concert. So as we think about how do you start to scale this from a business perspective, how do we get the CHRO and the CIO to speak to one another? How do we get them to start to report to the board in a common language way? These are not two inseparable things. These are like how we're going to operate going forward. So as a result, we have to change the way in which we're reporting on these things. And of course, we have to change the way we structure our operating models to deliver against this too, which includes the people part of it. So I think that speed is always going to be held back if those things aren't aligned.
I think this is an area too where boards can be really helpful to
Yeah.
companies and executive teams, because it's our job, right, to take the high level, big picture view, ask strategic questions, ask how the CIO is communicating, right, to the rest of the team. And so these are areas I think as board members that we can add value in asking those strategic questions, hearing what the answers are. And again, I think back to Sandra's original point about how everything's changing so quickly. And isn't it interesting, Robert, about those stats that the adoption is actually not,
Yeah.
at lightning speed, right? It's because everything's moving so fast, people aren't sure where to focus or what is stable, right? Where to invest. And so I think, my point is, as board members, this is an area where we can kind of help sort through and ask those questions to get teams thinking through what the right strategy is for them.
I'm going to share that's something that came out of an event 2 weeks ago with regards to there was venture capital, big tech, startups, and it was anchored on CMOs, but it was some interesting wisdom that I think is worth sharing that goes to the adoption. One, I will steal from Gordon Moore. He was a founder of Intel. Only the paranoid survive. And so if you're the board, to Leah's point, and the C-level suite, think about there is a startup happening that is going to displace you. So that should create a sense of urgency. And then the question is, where do you start? And this point resonated for so many, and we haven't heard this before, is that oftentimes you're throwing AI everywhere. And so the suggestion was, this was a big company, is find where their money is at and throw AI there, meaning leverage it as an adder to that particular business, go through the workflow process, figure out in that entire workflow, where does AI add value and where do you need human judgment, right? Where do you need that critical thinking? Where do you need strategy? And start there, prove it, scale it out enterprise, and then go next. And that, to me, I felt like it was a very simple framework to provide people, like, you're not doing everything enterprise wide. You are finding a part of the business that's doing really well. AI is going to be a significant adder. And then you just start to look through workflow process that brings all the business units together, CFO, legal, marketing, product engineering. Then you make sure that you understand where humans are going to be and maybe where there's a new type of role that exists. So like in marketing, I firmly believe, because I tried these tools, content engineering, content prompting, knowing how to prompt so that you can get a 10-second video from Google VO is something radically new that you're going to have to use and have to learn. So that was a great framework that was shared with us 2 weeks ago.
I can't help but build on that, Sandra, because those are such good points. Two things that I'd like to mention. One is, first and foremost, don't underestimate the scale and the potential for the transformation. A lot of companies go through this phase where they get enterprise-wide ChatGPT or Google Gemini licenses at $40 a person or something like that. And then 6 months go by and they're like, oh, we're not getting much value out of it. AI is failing. Let's just go back to the way the world used to run. That is a mistake. It's really, really important to focus on those workflows, on those points of opportunity where you have the greatest business challenges. And then what is just as critical is recognize that it isn't about AI fitting into human engineered and designed workflows that have existed in corporate America for decades or even centuries. It's being open to rethinking what is the right workflow when you have an AI tool or an AI agent side by side as your peer. And the best way to explain this is what Doug McMillan of Walmart said barely 2 weeks ago in the journal, where he said that at Walmart, he's the CEO of Walmart, he said they're looking at every single role in the company, and they're the largest private employer in America, looking at it through the lens of, is that job going to exist in the future? To Robert's point, is it going to be augmented with AI, or is it going to change significantly? But they're working with the assumption that every role is going to have some kind of change at least.
And I would just say I totally agree, and that the augmented roles is, something that needs to be looked at in terms of what does that mean in terms of what's the future role look like. And so an example of that might be, and where there's actually some systems out there already that do agentic talent acquisition. And so now the recruiting population become a little bit more generalist. They become product owners of the ways in which we bring in qualified people. The speed to which this allows and accelerates sort of manual activities allows for a bit more thoughtfulness. And so thoughtfulness from a skills perspective is, how do we become more strategic in how we do the work? How do we bring in the right people from the right locations? And you can start to see this blurring of validation across things that were traditionally talent acquisition, recruiters, perhaps workforce planning and analytics, becomes all sort of similar sort of work that brings in the right person. And so we're starting to see that evolve, where there's this cross-functional view now that you can deploy agents across a particular process, but that does amplify, okay, what are we doing with the remaining people or the remaining tasks that are human-led? And how do we start to drive strategic value out of those specifically so we can have the better outcome?
Thanks, Robert. Leah, I wanted to go back and double click on something you had mentioned about the board's role. With technology continuously changing, what can board members do to ensure that they're well equipped to serve as fiduciaries on AI and talent topics?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think having educational opportunities like this is incredibly helpful. And I know that, at places like Stanford Directors College, for instance, they're doing whole tracks on AI and this. So any opportunities you have as a board member, I think, to chat with other board members about, what are the questions that are happening in your boardroom? What are the conversations? What are the risks? How should we be thinking about the data security aspect of it? What questions are you asking? I think that's so important. And I think just continuing education on being a good board member too in this fast-paced and changing world is really important.
Thanks. Helpful insights. But I am curious, to date, have you seen many boards actually hire external consultants to also help with the education and what companies might be doing, whether it's at a specific committee level or overall board level?
Yeah, I haven't seen it myself, very much on a broad scale. I've certainly seen, human capital committees, look for consulting from, AI experts on how to augment, workforces, and what that might look like. But again, I think this is all such new ground. I don't see it, happening on a grand scale, at least from my standpoint. I mean, maybe others have seen and had different experiences.
I can share an example of one of the companies that I'm on a board of. I won't name them. They have kicked off an AI for All initiative, which is inclusive of reimagining their internal infrastructure, as well as their overall curriculum. And so what we did, so on the board are two individuals that are located in Silicon Valley, me being one. The other one is also located here. And we did an AI tour, meeting with all the big tech and sharing what we are doing. And one to learn from them what's happening, and two, could there possibly be strategic partnerships for the transformation? Or is there certain synergies enough between the companies that we spoke to and the company that I'm a nonprofit for? They came out of that tech tour learning so much, and they're realizing that they're just taking a small snippet, just a sampling of what's possible. And afterwards, when we did a debrief, what some of the executives said to me, they're like, we're not in Silicon Valley, and I feel like we're in a bubble, and everything that was shared is so much more advanced and progressing at a faster rate than I even realized. And so I thought that was an interesting insight, because I live in the Bay Area. And for me, this is, and Leah, you can attest to this, we live this every single day. It's part of our overall DNA. And so hearing them say that makes me realize that maybe there should be more people even leaning into the big AI companies and helping them transform their organizations. And so I think that was an interesting framework that they use that maybe would be relevant for some of the people on the call.
I don't know if my public board is more an exception to the rule, but practically in every board meeting, we are either getting an AI update or we're doing some form of training and education. And to the original question, it's all of the above. Sometimes we bring in consultants, sometimes we bring in our vendor partners, whether it's an Amazon Web Services or a Snowflake or a Databricks or a Palantir type company. Sometimes it is academics. Sometimes it's the internal team, starting with the management team, updating on the progress on specific AI projects. I would suggest that if you're on a board that isn't talking about AI, and we're construction equipment, we're a physical world business. If you're not talking about AI and its potential and its impact and getting up to speed on it on a regular basis, you're missing out on something. You're missing an opportunity for your business.
Thanks, Shiv. Okay, Sandra, I wanted to take it back to you and, get your thoughts in terms of, workforce transformation, and for those that, making sure that management is, looking at this and there's some type of strategy in place. What questions should directors be asking management? I guess we have to look at it from two perspectives. One, if you're already on the journey, and one, if you haven't even begun the journey.
I mean, I think it's asking, what is the AI strategy? How are you planning to measure the outcomes of the AI strategy? And how do we avoid pilot purgatory? So whether you are in the compensation talent team, we've been talking about this, like the upskilling. What is that workforce? What are we going to do? Are we going to lay off a % of talent? And are the agents ready for that? At what point? And I think when we were doing our discussion in advance, I don't know if it was Robert or Shiv, but the tech industry is already laying off thousands and thousands of people, and they're still hitting their revenue targets, are still profitable. They're doing well. And so I think other companies are going to follow. They're not going to be the exception. So thinking about that, if you're in the governance, and I think, Leah, you talked about this, data integrity, the ethics. You have synthetic data out there that's impersonating people, and thinking about all of that. So it's, as Shiv mentioned earlier, it's every part of the board should be talking about this. Some people can go deeper based on whether it's in their governance or talent or compensation, and bring forward a strategy that you can think about that does not get you into pilot purgatory, because then we're never going to move forward. And that's the worst thing. And so the question is, how do you get to pilot, test, learn, and scale? And I think every company is different. Culture is different. How fast you move is different. The complexity, if you're dealing with a fintech company or financial, is very different from a traditional CPG. So it's a lot. And I go back to like my own lesson, being both on a board as well as an employee, is I have to go get my own board of advisors around AI so that I can learn and be a sponge and be curious. And when I have questions, lean on them for, hey, company X, we're struggling. What are your thoughts? And kind of figure out a game plan.
Yeah. So Shiv, what other tools and frameworks are you seeing, or needing to use when it comes to assessing how the change in work and skills can adapt quickly enough together?
Yeah, so we found two different frameworks to be particularly effective. So the first one is to use, the innovation framework of Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3 innovations, and to identify, some of the most complex or business critical processes where we know we aren't necessarily using all the data we have as effectively as we could. And then, launching projects, in some cases pilots, in some cases, scaling up very rapidly to look at the problem. Is it a Horizon 1, which means something that we can solve and fix in year 1, identify the partner, if it's an external partner, and then just go and launch with it right away. The other frameworks that we're starting to think about, and across my work I'm looking at, is using these third-party tools, which are around talent management first and foremost, where, and there are few companies in the space, and I do this for my, I talk about this at a conference I host, the AI Trailblazers conference, where we look at, in the entirety of an organization, let's say it's a 100,000 employee organization, it has, 2,000 different distinct roles. These companies have done the data and analysis to help us understand what percentage of each of those roles is either going to go away or be augmented by AI, and what training and what workflow changes are required as a result of that. And that allows for a really nice enterprise-wide look at the transformation that needs to go on the talented side, on the talent side. So one is the innovation lens, using the traditional Horizon 1, Horizon 2, Horizon 3 framework to identify opportunities and execute on them. The other is talent specific and using some of these new tools that help us understand what roles are transforming with AI, how much, and what changes we should make to the workflow or the business operations.
We look at it very similarly, Shiv, in that we kind of coined it the 3 W's. So we think about the work, the workforce, and the worker. So the work, and how is it changing? And to your point, like, are we automating it fully? Or are we augmenting it? And sort of how does that start to redesign the way we think about planning? We redesign the roles themselves, and of course, how do we want to pay and incentivize for the specific outcomes of those roles? And then the worker element, of course, is like, how do we start to implement change and adoption through upskilling and sort of not leaving anyone behind as it relates to the future state operating model. And so I do appreciate your model, because it's something that I think, in another point you made, is don't lose sight of the sort of the end goal. It might be hard, but if it's not interconnected with the ways in which you're going to deploy this and the time horizon required of those pilots and then full use case development.
Thanks, Robert. We actually had another question that came in, and the question is, how should we think of next gen talent strategy with offshoring to AI employees? And if the group has any thoughts, perspectives there.
I would say this is where the people strategy does become, and like, our people strategies need to become a bit more sophisticated and really consider all the things we've talked about. But we've also seen onshoring or reshoring of skills based on the movement towards AI. And I think you can start to think about, again, how do we complement the capabilities we need through a variety of sources, whether it be on or offshore. It could be, hybrid or automated, or different captive centers. But I think that's what I think oftentimes is missing, is this construct around people strategy and how you're going to source the resources and capabilities to deliver those outcomes. And I say those are somewhat generic terms, but when we say resources and capabilities, it's It's really people, technology, and location and things of that nature to drive those outcomes. And I think this is all forcing the need to reevaluate those strategies today. And and it's almost sort of the urgency to that is now, because it is more important than ever, because we're losing sort of our connection to the tech, right? And I think this is either an opportunity or something that we're going to not have the capacity to actually see the full return on those investments.
Great, thanks, Robert. And I guess, when board members ask, what should our AI or human capital strategy be? How do you help them get in a good place? Or, what other leading practices perhaps do you provide them to get them there?
I think we've hit a lot of these already in terms of thinking about the business value, not just the technology, which we get tied up to, and then we try to prove out these use cases. So I think that one in particular is very critical. And to my point, it needs to be rethought to how Shiv described the framework. It needs to have this integrated view of how we're bringing these things together, not one or the other. Perhaps the other thing that kind of leads and accelerates that is the connection between the CFO, the CIO, and the CHRO, and how we want them to start to work as one versus these functional areas that were in the past perfectly okay separate. But I think as you start to see this acceleration of tech and people, and the required need to look at AI adoption rates and reskilling readiness and the capabilities you're building, and how you're going to fund it, I think these things are converging quickly within organizations and need to be rethought. So I think those two areas in particular are critical to kind of tying the human capital or workforce strategies to ensuring that we get the return on these things.
I want to share an example because Robert, you brought up a case. Well, it's not even a case study, but a company publicly traded took the board and the C-suite out for an AI planning session, and they reimagined what their company would look like in AI first. And what they said is, and they're codependent on this mobile app, and they're like, in an AI first world, we would not have a mobile app. And so that really got them thinking and ideating of where they need to go and how to leverage AI to accelerate to meet the demands of their consumer. And at the same time, it brought their C-suite closer together as part of that exercise. So I thought that was really interesting in terms of how do you reimagine your company in an AI-driven world, and what would still exist and what would not, from people, process, and the product or service that you're delivering.
And just another way to maybe think about it that builds on what Robert and Sandra have said is, it's super important to go back to the fundamentals. And by the fundamentals, I mean, how well organized is your data? Is your data your new oil? That's the way it should be. It should be the connective glue across your functions, across your teams, your geographies, your business processes. How are you thinking about your relationships with the LLMs, with the major AI companies? Because that should be a thoughtful, strategic, enterprise-wide choice. How are you thinking about the application layer? How does that change in what ways? What does your application portfolio look like? And then, as Sandra was hinting at, what does it mean for that endpoint customer experience, where it may not be a mobile app, but it could be voice-driven, it could be something else. So it's important to look across that entire spectrum. And then when you think about AI strategy, recognize that governance and enterprise governance is probably one of the few pieces, along with the data, that can sit at the enterprise layer, because so much needs to be function by function. And I saw a question about, who should be responsible for the AI strategy. It should be the function leader for each and every function, as long as they're getting the enablement support, around the data, around the tools, around the governance from them.
Yeah, just to bring more data to support that, Shiv, from that study I referenced, around 95% aren't getting the measurable ROI. One of the things that was quoted as the reason behind that is over centralized innovation, meaning it's not pushed out to the business. It's not sort of process specific. And there is a sort of, I think, a shift, a bit of this over reliance of the governance structure to that it's a burden versus an enabler. So I think as we've seen the shift in terms of accelerated adoption is having a responsible AI framework of some level that does give people permission to operate within the construct, as opposed to having it, either always questioned or just sort of not well known.
Thanks, Robert. So Sandra, I mean, as we heard, AI can impact so many different parts within the organization. And so when it comes to oversight, with regards to AI and talent, should this be an overall board level oversight? Should it be the compensation committee? Should there be perhaps maybe a new committee that's established to ensure that initiatives are underway and the appropriate oversight is provided? And questions are asked among management.
I think every board functions differently. So I think it really depends on the board. From my vantage point, because it's still new, we're still learning. It should be, everybody should have AI as part of their overall muscle that we're trying to understand implications. I highlighted earlier that if you're in the compensation and talent committee, you're looking at upskilling. If you're in the governance, you're thinking about data integrity and data biases and all the new rules and laws that are coming into play. So I do not think it's one person. If you think you need to augment, I think Shiv, you talked about this too. If you need to have a subcommittee on around AI, that's something to consider, but there's pros and cons. Maybe you then become so reliant on this subcommittee to help drive overall governance or talent, and you can't put the pressure on just, I think, a subcommittee to help drive enterprise-wide transformation if that is your goal. So it depends on ultimately what is the goal for the overall company, where does AI sit, and does it make sense for all of the board of directors to have a component? But what I do like, and I'll take away and I'll adopt it from one of the big tech companies, is that they made AI literacy an OKR for every single employee, simply so that we can all collectively build a muscle. And I thought that was a really great, and how they did it was just, it was a way that everybody was able to achieve it. So then you can actually drive positive reinforcement. And I think the same thing for the various board members. Some board members know very little of AI, surprisingly. And so how do you start to drive literacy within your board of directors as well? Because you can't ask something of your talent, of your employees, if your board or your C-suite aren't AI literate.
Very helpful. Thanks for sharing that. So Shiv, how should boards guide management to balance shareholder expectations with AI reskilling and workforce implications, as well as potentially any reputational risks that might be out there?
Yeah, no, lot to unpack there. So first and foremost, I would say the good news is the fundamentals of business have not changed. So, look at AI through the lens of how it can accelerate, drive productivity, drive efficiency, efficacy, whatever your criteria is for the business. I encourage folks, whether it's on the boards that I said or when I advise others, is look at your hardest problems. Don't look at your easiest problems. Look at your hardest problems where you need help, and see if, sophisticated AI with access to all of your data can lead you to new solutions and new workflows and new business processes and new business outcomes. So I'd say that's probably in many respects the most important way to think about it. The others, that when it comes to board oversight, something that we touched on only a little bit, responsible AI is super important. And unfortunately, we live in an age where a lot of companies think about what's oftenly jokingly called regulatory arbitrage, which is a company will go and do something with AI or launch an AI product or tool that is not actually strictly in the confines of the law, but by the time the law catches up with them, they've gathered enough momentum, gotten enough customers that they can get away with it. That's not good practice for a private company, public company, any type of company. It can be tempting to do that, but it's very important, especially at the board level, to make sure that companies in this complex, messy, sloppy age, that's Mustafa Suleyman, the Microsoft AI CEO, describing the phase we're in, said is, we have to stay true to our values, our organizational values, our human values, and apply that same discipline, professionalism, and accountability that we do to any other part of an organizational decision that comes before a board.
Thank you, Shiv. Well, Sandra, Leah, Shiv, and Robert, thank you very much for sharing your perspectives and experiences. As we wrap up today's session, I would appreciate if you could provide one or two key takeaways or questions that board members should bring forth to their next meeting. Leah, maybe perhaps we go with you first.
I'm happy to start. Yeah, I mean, I think my lens and my big learning through all of this is how can we as board members add the most value and support at this really critical moment in time. And so I think figuring out what are the right questions to ask in that boardroom that can help management and help the team think about, you know, blind spots, things that they're missing. I would just, you know, the takeaway for me would be go find that list of 5 questions you think would be helpful for you as a board member to ask.
Sandra, you want to go next?
Yeah, I think I'm just sharing what I'm seeing is working is possibly look outside of your company and have a board of directors to advise the board of directors within the company, because we're all learning so quickly. Or the equivalent was that doing the AI tour in Silicon Valley, because what you're just getting is a glimpse of what's possible. When you sit there and meet with them, they will open the door in terms of things that you realize are not happening within workflow in terms of agent to agent. And so my thing is leverage other people to get smarter on your overall strategy and the execution of the strategy, both the benefits and the risk that are at bay as well.
Steve, any final thoughts?
Look, the only other thing I would have add is come to the table with a lot of empathy. You know, management teams have it hard. Like, we're in a year of, uncertain. It's a complex political environment. The economic forecasts for the next 2 years are not clear. We're dealing with, complicated tariff strategies. Businesses have enough to stress them about already. Without a doubt, AI should be on everyone's agenda. But when you talk to the management team, carry some empathy, because it's hard goings right now in many respects.
And Robert, last but not least, any last words of wisdom?
I mean, be empathetic, of course, and just talk about like that. It goes for the workforce too. So how are we thinking about our people strategies? How do we remain focused on our culture? And ultimately, how do we want to establish the right tracking mechanisms to ensure that we're going down the right path? It sounds simple, but I think there's, as I mentioned, that divergence that's occurring that I think just needs to be reevaluated how that gets reported.
Great. Well, thank you all very much. Really, really appreciate your time.